October 2014. The autumn chill cut through downtown Spokane like a blade, painting breath in visible clouds as Detective Sarah Martinez stepped out of her unmarked sedan at 6:47 a.m. 3 police cruisers and a forensics van had already assembled outside the weathered brick facade of Pacific Steelworks, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the industrial landscape that had defined this corner of Washington for over 5 decades. Martinez was reviewing case files from a routine fraud investigation when her radio crackled with news that would shatter the quiet morning and unearth secrets buried for 46 years. What began as a simple employee background check had transformed into the most significant breakthrough in one of Spokane's most haunting cold cases, sending shockwaves through a community that thought it had moved beyond the horrors of 1968. The discovery came through an unexpected source: mandatory DNA collection for all employees following a workplace accident insurance claim. Robert Chen, the mill's safety coordinator, had submitted biological samples from the entire welding crew when investigators required genetic profiles to rule out pre-existing medical conditions. Among those samples was genetic material from 47-year-old Marcus Theodore Brennan, a respected welder who had worked the third shift for nearly 3 decades. When the sample entered the national database, it triggered an alert that sent cold case detectives scrambling for files that had gathered dust in basement storage rooms since the Nixon administration. The match connected Brennan to trace DNA evidence recovered from the 1968 murder scene of 23-year-old Linda Marie Castellanos, a crime that had terrorized Spokane's close-knit community and remained unsolved despite decades of investigation. The genetic evidence, extracted from degraded samples using cutting-edge technology unavailable to investigators in 1968, provided the first concrete lead in a case that had consumed 3 generations of detectives and left a family shattered by unanswered questions. If you're interested in true crime cases with details that mainstream coverage often overlooks, please hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to uncover revelations that will change everything you thought you knew about this decades-old mystery. Linda Marie Castellanos was born on March 15, 1945, to Antonio and Rosa Castellanos, immigrants from Mexico, who had built a modest but comfortable life in Spokane's South Hill neighborhood. Standing 5 feet 8 inches tall with striking black hair that fell in gentle waves to her shoulders, Linda possessed penetrating green eyes that friends described as capable of seeing through any pretense. Her athletic build reflected years of basketball at Lewis and Clark High School, where she had earned a scholarship to Eastern Washington University. A distinctive crescent-shaped scar above her left eyebrow, the result of a childhood bicycle accident, became one of the identifying features that would later prove crucial to the investigation. Antonio Castellanos worked as a foreman at the Burlington Northern Railroad yards, while Rosa managed the household and took in sewing to supplement the family income. Linda was the eldest of 4 children, with younger brothers Miguel, 16, Carlos, 14, and sister Patricia, just 11 years old, in 1968. The family lived in a neat 2-story house on South Perry Street, where Rosa maintained a garden that was the envy of neighbors, and Antonio spent weekends restoring classic cars in the garage he had built himself. Linda was the light of our family, Rosa would later tell investigators through tears. She had dreams bigger than Spokane, bigger than anything we could have imagined for ourselves when we came here with nothing. Linda's psychology professor at Eastern Washington, Dr. Margaret Thornton, remembered her as exceptionally bright and compassionate. She wanted to work with troubled children, to give them the kind of support and guidance that she felt every child deserved. Linda saw potential in everyone, sometimes to a fault. The summer of 1968 found Linda working 2 jobs to save money for her senior year of college. During the day, she served as a counselor at Camp Spokane, a summer program for underprivileged children run by the YMCA. In the evenings, she waitressed at Mickey's Diner on Division Street, a popular spot where railroad workers, college students, and local families gathered for hearty meals and conversation. Her routine was predictable and purposeful, driven by the ambition to become the first college graduate in her extended family. The Spokane of 1968 was a city in transition, its population hovering around 170,000 residents who took pride in their community's reputation for safety and neighborliness. The downtown core bustled with department stores like the Crescent and Nordstrom, while the Spokane River wound through the heart of the city, providing both scenic beauty and industrial power for the mills that employed thousands of local residents. Railroad money had built grand neighborhoods on the South Hill, while working-class families like the Castellanos had carved out comfortable lives in the city's expanding suburbs. The social fabric of late 1960s Spokane reflected the broader tensions gripping America. While anti-war protests raged on college campuses and civil rights movements challenged long-held assumptions about equality, Spokane maintained its reputation as a conservative, family-oriented community where neighbors looked out for each other, and violent crime remained relatively rare. The city's Hispanic population, concentrated primarily in the South Hill and East Central neighborhoods, faced subtle but persistent discrimination that limited opportunities despite their significant contributions to the local economy through railroad and agricultural work. Gonzaga University provided an intellectual anchor for the community, while Fairchild Air Force Base brought military families and federal dollars that helped stabilize the local economy during uncertain times. The intersection of college life, military presence, and blue-collar industry created a unique social dynamic where different worlds occasionally collided, sometimes with unexpected consequences. Local landmarks included Riverfront Park, still in development for the upcoming 1974 World's Fair, and the historic Davenport Hotel, where important business and political decisions shaped the region's future. August 23, 1968 began as an ordinary Thursday in the Castellanos household. Linda woke at 6:15 a.m. to help her mother prepare breakfast before the younger children started their final week of summer vacation. At 7:30 a.m., she kissed her parents goodbye and drove her father's 1965 Chevrolet Impala to Camp Sakani, where she spent the morning organizing art activities for 37 children, aged 6 to 12. Camp director James Morrison later recalled Linda's enthusiasm that day, noting that she had volunteered to help plan the end-of-summer celebration scheduled for the following week. At 12:45 p.m., Linda shared lunch with fellow counselor Janet Kowalski, discussing their plans for the upcoming school year and Linda's excitement about her senior thesis on childhood trauma and resilience. Kowalski remembered Linda mentioning a brief conversation with a man who had approached her near the camp parking lot, asking about enrollment procedures for his nephew. She said he seemed nice enough, but there was something about him that made her uncomfortable, Kowalski would later tell police. Linda was usually so good with people, so when she mentioned feeling uneasy, it stuck with me. The camp day ended at 4:00 p.m., and Linda spent 30 minutes helping clean up art supplies and ensure that all children were safely picked up by parents or guardians. At 4:45 p.m., she stopped at a Texaco station on North Division to fill the Impala's gas tank, paying the attendant with exact change and commenting on the unusual heat for late August. Security cameras, still a rarity in 1968, did not capture this interaction, but attendant Robert Walsh remembered Linda as polite and seemingly in good spirits. At 5:30 p.m., Linda arrived home for dinner, where the family discussed Miguel's upcoming football tryouts and Patricia's nervousness about starting 6th grade. Rosa had prepared Linda's favorite meal of chicken enchiladas with Spanish rice, a tradition the family maintained every Thursday evening. Antonio recalled his daughter seeming distracted during dinner, checking the clock repeatedly and excusing herself early to prepare for her evening shift at Mickey's Diner. Linda left home at 6:45 p.m., telling her parents she would return by midnight after closing the restaurant and finishing inventory duties. At 7:15 p.m., she arrived at Mickey's Diner and tied her hair back with a blue ribbon, a detail that would later become significant to investigators. Her shift began with the usual evening rush of railroad workers ending their day shifts and families seeking an affordable dinner out. Co-worker Betty Romano noted that Linda seemed more quiet than usual, but attributed it to fatigue from the demanding schedule she had maintained throughout the summer. The last confirmed sighting of Linda alive came at 11:30 p.m., when regular customer Harold Fitzgerald saw her wiping down tables as Mickey's Diner prepared to close. Fitzgerald, a Burlington northern engineer who often stopped for coffee after late runs, remembered Linda smiling and waving as he left, completely unaware that he had witnessed the final moments of a young woman whose death would haunt Spokane for decades. Mickey's Diner officially closed at midnight, but Linda's car remained in the parking lot until morning, when day shift waitress Carol Hughes discovered it unlocked with Linda's purse still on the front seat. The discovery launched a frantic search that would transform from a missing person case into a homicide investigation within hours, forever altering the sense of security that had defined this Pacific Northwest community. The search for Linda Castellanos began at 7:20 a.m. on August 24th, when Carol Hughes found the abandoned Impala and immediately contacted Mickey's Diner manager, Frank Petrosky. Petrosky arrived at 7:35 a.m. and confirmed that Linda's purse contained her wallet, car keys, and a small notebook where she recorded her work schedule and college assignments. The cash register showed no signs of robbery, and the restaurant appeared secure, eliminating the possibility that Linda had been the victim of a burglary gone wrong. Spokane Police Detective Raymond Mueller responded to the call at 8:05 a.m. and immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation based on Linda's reputation for reliability and the unusual circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Mueller organized search teams that combed the immediate area around Mickey's Diner, expanding outward in concentric circles as hours passed without any trace of the missing young woman. By noon, over 50 volunteers had joined professional searchers in scouring vacant lots, abandoned buildings, and the banks of the Spokane River. The breakthrough came at 2:45 p.m., when search dog handler Lieutenant Patricia Vance and her German Shepherd Rex detected human scent near a construction site approximately 2 miles from Mickey's Diner. The site, where developers planned to build a shopping complex, consisted of cleared land surrounded by mature pine trees that provided natural concealment from the nearby residential neighborhood. Construction equipment sat idle, as work had been suspended pending resolution of a zoning dispute that would drag through the courts for months. Rex led handlers to a shallow depression behind a pile of construction debris where Linda's body lay partially concealed under branches and discarded building materials. The positioning suggested that her killer had attempted to hide the body, but had been interrupted or had worked hastily in darkness. Dr. William Patterson, Spokane County's chief medical examiner, arrived at 3:30 p.m. and immediately secured the scene, pending a thorough forensic investigation. The crime scene revealed crucial evidence that would frustrate investigators for decades, while providing the genetic material that would eventually solve the case in 2014. Linda's blue ribbon lay approximately 6 feet from her body, suggesting a struggle had occurred before she was moved to the final location. Investigators recovered tire tracks from what appeared to be a pickup truck or van, though rain during the early morning hours had compromised the clarity of the impressions. Most significantly, forensics teams collected trace evidence, including hair fibers that did not match Linda's distinctive black hair, skin cells found under her fingernails indicating she had fought her attacker, and fabric fragments that suggested her killer had worn work clothes during the assault. The evidence pointed to someone familiar with the construction site who had access to transportation, large enough to move Linda's body from Mickey's Diner to the remote location. The scene told a story of violence, but also of courage, Detective Mueller would later write in his case notes. Linda Castellanos did not go quietly into that night. She fought for her life, and in doing so, she left us clues that we believed would eventually lead us to her killer. The evidence was meticulously catalogued and stored according to 1968 protocols, preserved in conditions that would allow future DNA analysis using technology that existed only in the realm of science fiction at the time. Have you ever wondered how different your hometown might be if a single act of violence had never occurred? The ripple effects of Linda's murder would touch every corner of Spokane, changing how parents supervised their children and how young women navigated the world, proving that some crimes transcend their immediate victims to wound entire communities. The initial investigation into Linda Castellanos' murder represented the most intensive law enforcement effort in Spokane's history up to that point. Detective Raymond Mueller assembled a task force that included 12 investigators from the Spokane Police Department, 4 detectives from the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, and consultants from the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory. The limitations of 1968 investigative technology meant that solving the case would depend primarily on witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, and the methodical elimination of potential suspects through traditional detective work. The task force's first priority involved reconstructing Linda's final hours and identifying everyone who had contact with her on August 23rd. This process revealed several individuals who became persons of interest, each bringing their own complex web of alibis, motives, and connections to the victim. The investigation would ultimately examine dozens of potential suspects before focusing on 5 individuals whose proximity to Linda and suspicious behavior warranted intensive scrutiny. The first major suspect emerged within days of the discovery of Linda's body. David Lawrence Hoffman, 34 years old and recently divorced, worked as a construction foreman at the site where Linda's body was found. Hoffman had been responsible for security at the construction site and possessed keys to equipment storage areas that could have provided concealment during the crime. Investigators discovered that Hoffman had been terminated from his previous job following accusations of inappropriate behavior toward female co-workers, though no formal charges had been filed. Hoffman claimed to have spent the evening of August 23rd drinking at Sullivan's Tavern on East Sprague, but bartender testimony proved inconsistent regarding his presence and departure time. 3 witnesses remembered seeing Hoffman at the bar, but their accounts differed by nearly 2 hours regarding when he left. More troubling, Hoffman drove a 1963 Ford pickup truck that matched tire impressions found at the crime scene, and paint samples from his vehicle contained traces of material consistent with debris found on Linda's clothing. Despite these connections, Hoffman's alibi ultimately held under intensive investigation. Sullivan's Tavern owner Martin Sullivan produced receipts showing that Hoffman had purchased drinks using a bar tab that required his signature at timed intervals throughout the evening. Security guard Thomas Mitchell confirmed seeing Hoffman's distinctive pickup truck in the tavern parking lot from 10:30 p.m. until approximately 1:15 a.m., making it impossible for him to have been at Mickey's Diner during the crucial time window. Hoffman was formally eliminated as a suspect on September 15, 1968, though he remained under surveillance for several additional weeks. The second suspect, Gerald Francis Kowalski, 28, was the older brother of Linda's camp counselor colleague, Janet Kowalski. Gerald worked as a mechanic at Brennan's Auto Repair and had met Linda several times when she picked up Janet for social activities. Janet revealed to investigators that Gerald had expressed romantic interest in Linda and had asked Janet to arrange a double date that Linda had politely declined. Gerald's mechanical skills and access to various vehicles made him particularly interesting to investigators attempting to match tire evidence from the crime scene. Gerald's behavior following Linda's disappearance raised additional suspicions. Co-workers at Brennan's Auto Repair reported that Gerald had called in sick on August 24th, claiming to be suffering from food poisoning, but neighbors saw him washing his personal vehicle extensively in his driveway during the morning hours. When investigators examined Gerald's 1966 Dodge van, they found that the interior had been recently cleaned with industrial-strength solvents that could have eliminated biological evidence. However, Gerald's alibi proved equally solid upon thorough investigation. His landlord, Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, confirmed that Gerald had returned to his apartment building at approximately 10:45 p.m. on August 23rd and had engaged in a lengthy argument with his girlfriend, Sandra Walsh, that lasted until nearly 2:00 a.m. Multiple tenants corroborated hearing the argument, and Sandra Walsh confirmed the timeline despite her anger toward Gerald over the relationship issues they had been discussing. Phone records showed that Gerald had made several calls to his sister Janet between midnight and 1:30 a.m., seeking advice about his relationship problems. The third suspect generated significant community interest due to his prominence in local social circles. Dr. Michael Stephen Radcliffe, 41, was a respected pediatrician who had treated Linda during her childhood and had maintained contact with the Castellanos family through his work at Sacred Heart Medical Center. Dr. Radcliffe had recently undergone a difficult divorce that revealed gambling debts and allegations of prescription drug abuse, factors that had damaged his previously sterling reputation. Nurses at Sacred Heart reported that Dr. Radcliffe had been asking unusual questions about Linda's college plans and work schedule, conversations that seemed to extend beyond normal medical interest. More concerning, hospital records showed that Dr. Radcliffe had access to medications that could have been used to incapacitate a victim, and his medical training would have provided knowledge about avoiding detection of such substances in post-mortem examinations. Dr. Radcliffe's whereabouts on the night of August 23rd initially could not be confirmed, as he claimed to have been alone in his apartment, reviewing medical journals and preparing for a hospital board meeting. His ex-wife, Margaret Radcliffe, told investigators that her former husband had been calling her repeatedly during their divorce proceedings, sometimes at very late hours, but she had not received any calls on the night in question. The lack of a solid alibi, combined with his connections to Linda and access to means of committing the crime, made Dr. Radcliffe a primary focus of the investigation for several weeks. The case against Dr. Radcliffe collapsed when investigators discovered that he had been under surveillance by hospital administrators concerned about his prescription drug access. Security guards conducting random checks of the hospital pharmacy had encountered Dr. Radcliffe in his office at 11:15 p.m. on August 23rd, working on patient files and appearing completely normal. Additional verification came from the hospital's telephone operator, who had connected several calls to Dr. Radcliffe's office between 11:30 p.m. and 12:45 a.m. from patients concerned about children with late-night medical emergencies. The fourth suspect emerged from Linda's work environment at Mickey's Diner. Thomas Allen Petrov, 25, worked as a cook and had developed what co-workers described as an unhealthy obsession with Linda during the summer of 1968. Petrov, recently discharged from the army following service in Vietnam, lived alone in a basement apartment and exhibited behavioral changes that concerned fellow employees. Several waitresses reported that Petrov often lingered after his shift ended, appearing to wait for opportunities to interact with Linda when she arrived for her evening duties. Restaurant manager Frank Petrovsky confirmed that Petrov had requested schedule changes that would allow him to work during Linda's shifts, requests that seemed inconsistent with his previous preferences for morning cooking duties. More disturbing, Linda had confided to co-worker Betty Romano that Petrov made her uncomfortable with intense staring and attempts to engage her in personal conversations about her college plans and family life. Petrov's military background provided him with physical capabilities and potentially violent training that could have enabled him to overpower Linda despite her athletic build and strong spirit. His familiarity with the restaurant's closing procedures would have allowed him to predict Linda's routine and plan an attack accordingly. Additionally, Petrov owned a motorcycle that could have provided transportation between Mickey's Diner and the construction site, though tire evidence suggested a four-wheeled vehicle had been used. The investigation of Thomas Petrov revealed significant psychological issues stemming from his combat experiences in Southeast Asia, but also provided him with an unshakable alibi for the night of Linda's murder. Veterans Administration records showed that Petrov had been attending a mandatory group therapy session at the VA hospital from 7:00 p.m. until 11:00 p.m. on August 23rd, part of treatment for what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Session leader Dr. Robert Thornton confirmed Petrov's attendance and noted that he had seemed particularly engaged in discussions that evening, remaining after the official session ended to speak privately with counselors until nearly midnight. How late is it where you're watching this? Time has a way of revealing truths that seemed impossible to uncover when Linda Castellanos died on that August night in 1968, reminding us that justice sometimes requires the patience of decades. The discovery sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of steelworkers who had worked alongside Marcus Thompson for over 3 decades. Detective Sarah Chen watched as uniformed officers processed the scene at Thompson's modest ranch home on Elm Street, where DNA evidence had finally connected the respected welder to the brutal murder of Linda Sue Morrison in 1968. I've been investigating cold cases for 15 years, and I've never seen a community react with such complete disbelief. Chen told reporters outside the home. This man coached Little League, volunteered at the fire department, and was considered a pillar of this neighborhood. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. Advanced mitochondrial DNA analysis, conducted at the state laboratory in Seattle, had matched hair fibers found beneath Morrison's fingernails to Thompson, with a probability of 99.7% accuracy. Dr. Patricia Williams, the lead forensic scientist on the case, explained the breakthrough during a press conference at Spokane Police Headquarters. The genetic material recovered in 1968 was degraded, but not destroyed. Modern extraction techniques allow us to amplify even the smallest DNA fragments and create comprehensive genetic profiles that simply weren't possible 50 years ago. Thompson's arrest on November 15, 2024, at 6:23 a.m., occurred as he was preparing for his morning shift at Pacific Steelworks. Witnesses described seeing the 78-year-old man emerge from his garage in work clothes, lunch pail in hand, when unmarked police vehicles surrounded his driveway. He just stood there for the longest time, staring at the badges, recalled neighbor Dorothy Martinez, who witnessed the arrest from her kitchen window. Then he set down his lunchbox very carefully and put his hands behind his back without saying a word. The psychological profile that emerged painted a disturbing picture of calculated deception spanning 5 decades. Dr. Michael Hoffman, a forensic psychologist who consulted on the case, analyzed Thompson's behavior patterns following the 1968 murder. What we see here is a classic example of compartmentalization in antisocial personality disorder, Hoffman explained. The perpetrator creates distinct psychological spaces that allow them to commit horrific acts while maintaining a facade of normalcy and even community leadership. Thompson's post-crime life read like a textbook case of a psychopath hiding in plain sight. In 1972, just 4 years after Morrison's murder, he married Janet Powell, a local elementary school teacher who was completely unaware of her husband's dark past. The couple raised 2 children, Marcus Jr. and Susan, both of whom grew up believing their father was a hard-working, devoted family man. "Dad never missed a soccer game or school play," Susan Thompson Bradley recalled during a tearful interview. "He taught us about honesty and integrity. I don't know how to reconcile that with what we're learning now." Perhaps most chillingly, Thompson had maintained contact with Morrison's family over the decades, even attending memorial services on the anniversaries of her death. Patricia Morrison Hayes, Linda's younger sister, remembered Thompson approaching the family at various community events. "He would always ask how we were holding up and if there were any new developments in Linda's case," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "He looked us in the eyes and expressed sympathy while knowing exactly what happened to my sister. That level of cruelty is beyond comprehension." Church records revealed that Thompson had served as a deacon at First Methodist Church of Spokane for 12 years, from 1985 to 1997. Pastor Emeritus James Mitchell, now 89, remembered Thompson as exceptionally dedicated to community service. "Marcus organized our annual charity drives and personally delivered meals to elderly congregation members," Mitchell recalled. "He was so reliable, so trustworthy. We never had the slightest concern about his character or integrity." The welder's personnel files at Pacific Steelworks painted a similar picture of exemplary behavior. Thompson had received commendations for safety excellence, perfect attendance, and mentoring younger workers. Plant supervisor Robert Kelly, who worked with Thompson for 22 years before retiring, expressed complete shock at the arrest. "Marcus was the guy everyone went to for advice, both professional and personal," Kelly said. "He trained probably 50 apprentice welders over the years, and they all looked up to him like a father figure." Investigators discovered that Thompson had been remarkably strategic in his post-crime behavior, deliberately cultivating a reputation that would place him above suspicion. Detective Chen's review of the original 1968 investigation files revealed that Thompson had actually volunteered to help search for Morrison when she was first reported missing. He joined the search parties, distributed flyers, and even contributed money to the reward fund, Chen noted. This kind of calculated involvement is characteristic of organized offenders who derive satisfaction from inserting themselves into the investigation of their own crimes. The DNA breakthrough came as part of a systematic review of cold cases initiated by the Spokane County Sheriff's Department in 2023. Advanced genetic genealogy techniques, similar to those used to capture the Golden State Killer, allowed forensic scientists to create family trees from degraded DNA evidence. The process took 18 months of painstaking analysis, comparing genetic markers from the 1968 crime scene to millions of profiles in genealogical databases. Dr. Williams explained the technical process during a detailed briefing for law enforcement officials. We extracted mitochondrial DNA from hair follicles that had been preserved in evidence storage for 56 years. The samples were severely degraded, but new amplification techniques allowed us to recover enough genetic material to create a partial profile. We then used advanced algorithms to match that profile against reference databases containing genetic information from thousands of individuals. The investigation team faced significant challenges in building their case beyond the DNA evidence. Many witnesses from 1968 had died, and physical evidence had deteriorated over the decades. However, prosecutors felt confident that the genetic evidence, combined with Thompson's suspicious post-crime behavior, would be sufficient for conviction. District Attorney Michael Patterson announced his intention to seek a life sentence without parole, given Thompson's age and the heinous nature of the crime. Community reaction remained divided between shock and a sense of vindication for Morrison's family. Steel mill workers who had known Thompson for decades struggled to reconcile his public persona with the accusations against him. "I worked the same shift as Marcus for 15 years, said fellow welder James Rodriguez. "We talked about our families, our dreams for retirement. He seemed like the most normal guy in the world. It makes you question everything you think you know about people." The arrest also reopened painful wounds for Morrison's surviving family members who had waited more than 5 decades for answers. Her sister Patricia had become a vocal advocate for cold case investigations, lobbying state legislators for funding and resources. Linda would have been 73 years old now, Patricia said during a press conference following Thompson's arrest. She should have had children, grandchildren, a full life. Instead, her killer got to live the life she was denied while pretending to be a good man. Psychological experts emphasized that Thompson's case illustrated the frightening reality of how skilled manipulators can successfully deceive entire communities for decades. Dr. Hoffman noted that successful long-term deception requires extraordinary psychological compartmentalization. The perpetrator essentially creates multiple identities within themselves, he explained. They can genuinely experience emotions like love for family members or pride in community service, while simultaneously harboring the capacity for extreme violence. The investigation also revealed disturbing parallels to other unsolved cases from the late 1960s and early 1970s in the Pacific Northwest. Detectives were reviewing at least 6 similar murders of young women that occurred within a 200-mile radius of Spokane during that time period. While no definitive connections had been established, the possibility that Thompson might have been responsible for additional crimes added another layer of horror to an already shocking case. As Thompson awaited trial in Spokane County Jail, the community continued grappling with the implications of his double life. Mental health counselors reported increased demand for services as neighbors, co-workers, and church members struggled to process their feelings of betrayal and confusion. People are questioning their ability to judge character, to trust their instincts about others, said Counselor Maria Santos, who had treated several individuals affected by the revelations. The case also highlighted significant advances in forensic science and criminal investigation techniques. Law enforcement officials praised the dedication of cold case investigators who refused to let Morrison's murder be forgotten. This arrest demonstrates that no matter how much time passes, justice can still be served, said Sheriff Thomas Wagner. We owe it to victims and their families to never stop pursuing the truth, no matter how long it takes. For the Morrison family, Thompson's arrest represented both closure and the beginning of a new chapter in their long journey toward healing. While nothing could bring Linda back or erase the decades of pain and uncertainty, finally knowing who killed her provided a sense of resolution they had never dared hope for. We can finally stop wondering Patricia Morrison Hayes said, "We can finally know that the person responsible will be held accountable for what he did to our sister." The ripple effects of Thompson's arrest continued spreading through Spokane's steelworking community, where trust and brotherhood had been foundational values for generations. Union representatives announced counseling services for workers struggling to cope with the revelation that a respected colleague had harbored such a dark secret. The case served as a stark reminder that evil can wear the most ordinary faces and hide behind the most respectable facades, making it all the more important to pursue justice relentlessly, regardless of how much time has passed or how unlikely a suspect might seem.